Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. We'll give everybody just a couple of seconds here to get logged in, and we will begin shortly. Again, good afternoon, everybody. We're letting everybody get into the room here, and we will begin our webinar shortly. Again, welcome everybody. We're letting everybody into the room here. We'll begin in just a couple of seconds. Welcome. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. Welcome to the Deliverables-based IT services, or DBITS vendor debriefing. This is in reference to the RFO number DIR CPO TMP 553, and we are presenting this on Thursday, July 28th. Want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, reminder that you can change your audio by switching between computer and phone call. Let's do a quick sound check. If you can clearly hear us, make sure we have a good audio connection. Would you please raise your hand and let us know that we're coming in pretty clearly today? Excellent. Thank you very much. See lots of hands going up, so thank you for that. Reminder that all attendees today are muted. We invite you to open the Q&A box and put your questions in the Q&A box as we go along today, and we will take some time to get those answered for you. Please don't use the chat box for questions. Sometimes things can get lost in there, so we are closely monitoring the Q&A box for your questions today. And also a reminder that a copy of this presentation will be available after our webinar ends today. So with that, I'm going to introduce your presenter today. Speaking will be Colleen Berkeley, who is our Director of Procurement Services here at DIR in the Chief Procurement Office. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Colleen.
Thank you, Tom, and I am so happy to be here today with all of you. DBITS was quite a ride, so I want to give you an update on what the procurement process was. We're going to go through how we scored the DBITS procurements across the 4 technology categories. And then finally, I'll talk about areas for improvement that may benefit your company. So next slide, please, Tom. So what we published and how we did on meeting that. So as you all are aware, we did publish a pre-solicitation notice on April 5th, or slightly before April 5th. We did have it scheduled to go out on April 5th for the DBITS solicitation. We did not achieve that date. We actually published the RFO on June 18th of 2021. And that was an actual date, so we met that. Again, the pre-bid conference, we estimated it was going to be in April 14th. We ended up having that on June 23rd. Deadline for submitting questions, it was estimated April 26th. We had that on July 16th. And we basically had several rounds of questions. The deadline for submitting responses, we almost met this date. So July 26th, 2021 was what was published in the RFO. The actual due date for responses was August 2nd, 2021 at 2:00 p.m. And then we did proceed to the evaluation and clarifications. This went August through October, and we started making awards in November. We were on track to finish about February to March, but I had unforeseen medical complications that prohibit us from making that date. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we had multiple rounds of questions and answers. This is basically the question total that we answered in the number of questions deferred per solicitation addendum. So on June 28th, we published addendum 1. In that addendum, we had the pre-conference materials. We included an attachment 1 and exhibits B, C, and D in that attachment. And we also answered 177 questions. That's the majority of the questions that we got in, with 21 deferred. This rolling Q&A concept is something that DIR is really excited to be using with you all, because we feel like it can cut down on the number of questions that are duplicates that we do receive throughout the process. So we will always try to answer as many questions as possible and defer as few. On July 6th, we published addendum 2. In that addendum, all we did was answer 78 more questions. So now we've achieved a total of 255. And we deferred 2 questions. So we worked through that backlog of questions that we had, and we just had 2 more remaining to answer. Addendum 3, we did publish an updated Exhibit A. We answered 61 more questions on July 11th. So that took our grand total to 316 questions that were answered, with only 5 deferred. July 20th of 2021, we published addendum 4. So this addendum had an Exhibit A, an Exhibit B, and attachment 2 standard terms and conditions. So there were changes made as late as July 20th to those documents. We answered 78 more questions. So we had a grand total of 394 that were answered, and we ended up deferring 14. And then finally, on July 28th, addendum 5, we answered all of the remaining questions, and we provided an updated attachment 3 hub subcontracting plan sample form. So 408 total questions for this endeavor, and we basically were able to answer them within a 1-month period. Next slide, please. So August 2nd gets here, the big date. Everybody's going to turn in their responses. We had 217 responses that were correctly submitted in the bid stamp system. We received over 1,000 references, and those responses and references were submitted up to the exact due time, the 2:00 p.m. cutoff. The vendors that may have received notice that they were not submitted or they were in progress were 124 vendors. So we had 124 responses that either failed to hit the submit response button in the BidStat system. The respondents may have abandoned the response. They decided not to respond for whatever reason. And finally, the respondent had no intent to respond. And generally, we do see this because we have a lobbyist or another interested party who monitors the RFO's progress through the posting. Next slide. So for the responses that were received on time, they all had to go through an administrative review before we started our evaluation. We made sure in the administrative review that all documents were present. So we had a list of the documents, and we were looking for the documents to make sure that they were there. All required forms were signed. This is one of those areas where if a required form does not have a signature on it, we were having to disqualify them. And the materials were received timely. So again, it's that bid stamp cutoff period. It was exactly at 2:00. And if it came in at 2:01, we were not able to review that. Once administrative reviews were completed, it was turned over to the hub and financial teams. They did these ongoing checks throughout the awarding process. So the hub checked to make sure that the HSP was submitted and that it was signed, and whether or not the respondent performed a good faith effort to reach out to hubs throughout the process. The financial review, we looked to see that you provided us with a DUNS. And if you provided us with a DUNS, did you score better than a 9? So that's a 1 through 8 on the D&B index. If you scored a 9 on the D&B index, we did not award a contract to you. And just for your education, it is important that your company address in D&B is correct, because we use it as part of a 3-part match to match the company name, the company address, and now I can't remember the third part, but we match it up to make sure that we have the right company before we make a determination. So many of you through the negotiation process, I did reach out for that DUNS number to verify that we had the correct DUNS number. And then we ran that check to make sure that you were in good standing and financially solvent. Next slide. So once we finished all of the administrative checks, we had to evaluate your responses. This is from the RFO section 422, weighted evaluation criteria. We looked at the respondent experience and reference forms, and that made up 80% of your total score. And we also looked at the Exhibit C, the contract marketing and customer support plan. That made up the remaining 20% of the score. It was only those 3 items that we looked at. So respondent experience, all of the answers to those questions, the respondent reference forms, whether you turned in 1, 2, or 3 forms, you were scored the same, and the contract marketing and customer support plan. We also looked at the respondent's history and experience, which was captured by the comptroller's vendor performance tracking system. And finally, we considered your exceptions. No score was given to your exceptions, but we did consider it in light of the other criteria, and we used that to prioritize where you were negotiated with. So I will go into that in a little more detail later. Next slide. And this is just that mathematical layout. 80% plus 20% equals 100% of the score. Next slide. So once all of the responses were scored, we had to determine where the competitive breaks existed. We did not go into this solicitation with a predetermined number of awards. We instead relied on the competitive breaks to guide us where those awards needed to happen. This was mathematically determined by arranging the scores in order from the highest scoring vendor to the lowest scoring vendor, and then determining the average difference between 2 adjacent scores. So if number 1 was 100 and number 2 was 98, that's a 2-point difference. If number 3 was 96, it is 2 points between 98 to 96. If it was number 4 was whatever. And so you get the picture, but we basically determined what the break point was between each individual response, determined what the average was of all of those different gaps, and determined where the break points were amongst the entire list. So next page, please. So for technology category 1, the application development, maintenance, and support, technology upgrade, migration, and transformation, and enterprise resource planning. We had 187 of the 200 plus respondents who wanted this category. The competitive break was determined to be at 78. So 1 through 78 were potential awardees. And in that list, only 77 of the vendors were eligible for award once we factored in the DUNS in the hub subcontracting plans. Next slide. So technology category 2, the business intelligence, data management, analytics, and automation, including data warehousing. We had 133 respondents to this category. The competitive break was determined to be at 22 vendors, and all 22 vendors were eligible for award. Next slide. Technology category 3, IT assessments, planning, independent verification and validation, and market research. We had 129 vendors apply to that category. 72 vendors were in the competitive break, and only 70 vendors were eligible for award. And finally, number 4, technology category 4, project and program management. We had 153 respondents. The competitive break was at 35, and the eligible awardees was 35. Next slide, please. So in reviewing the responses that were in the competitive break, we needed to analyze the number and the nature of the total exceptions that were taken. So 49 total respondents took exception. 31 of those respondents, and this is across all categories, were determined to be in the competitive range. The exceptions were specific to Appendix A, terms and conditions. We did deprioritize the vendors who took exceptions, focusing on awards to vendors with no exceptions first. I think this number was somewhere around 70 vendors who took no exceptions, and we wanted to get those awards done quickly. DIR procurement and general counsel staff worked on the exceptions, conducting a series of reviews and when requested meetings to resolve the remaining exceptions. So this is why it took us all the way up until July to award contracts, because we were busy resolving those exceptions that were taken. All right, next slide. So areas for improvement. So this is where you guys can improve your score the next go around. So for Exhibit B, respondent experience, and Exhibit D, reference forms, this is what I noted in looking at the scores. So the VPTS scores, we did score those, and an A, score of A got a 9 points on our scale. A score of B got 8, C 6, D or below is a 1. If you were a vendor who has not previously done business with the state or had no results found for the last 3 years, you received an 8. So a B score, and we gave you 8 points for that. Some respondents did not follow the directions regarding having the reference email DIR directly. So some respondents decided that they were going to be nice and get the results of all of their references and send those to me themselves. Those references were not counted. The directions did say that the reference form had to come directly from the reference to DIR. Some respondents did not receive any references. So I treated a vendor who had 1 reference and a vendor who had 3 references exactly the same. You were scored exactly the same. However, if we did not have any references for you, you received a 0. You were scored a 0 for that category. Some respondents did not demonstrate the years of experience for the category they were pursuing or provided a short company history. So the evaluator comments, they really were very thorough at looking at the number of years of experience and scored that appropriately. So if you are only in business for a short amount of time, let's say 5 or less years, you were going up against some vendors who had 30+ years experience. And the evaluators did take that into account when they provided their scores. And then finally, the lack of detail regarding the reference projects. So either on the respondent reference form or in the description of your different projects that you wanted us to consider for your references, we were unable to determine if you had enough experience in that category because that detail was so lacking. So really do think about beefing up your project descriptions and the work that you did and making it tie directly to the category that you were applying for. Next slide. So the Exhibit C, Contract Marketing and Customer Support Plan. So we did score the answers exactly as they were written on Exhibit C. So if it had a number, it got a score. Some respondents chose not to answer all of the questions. That caused you to receive zeros in those categories that you left blank. Some respondents explained how they would recruit talent, but failed to discuss how they would engage with and market to customers. So it's important to us that you really do have that talent gathering piece of it, but we also needed you to really draw together how you're going to use them to engage with the customers and marketing to the customers because this contract has to stand on its own. We wanted this contract to be successful, and we did not get a clear picture that it would be successful with your firm. Some respondents did not address all market segments identified by DIR. So there were several market segments on that form, and we wanted to know, even if it's not applicable or no experience, we needed you to say that instead of just leaving it blank or leaving it subject to our interpretation. And then finally, some respondents did not include this exhibit at all with their response. So this was a response instruction. You had to submit Exhibit C with your response. However, we did not disqualify you if you did not submit it. You were just scored appropriately, and with no Exhibit C, you received a 0 score for 20% of the points. All right, so that's basically the presentation that I have today. It's a general high-level overview of what we did. Are there any questions that you all have?
Hi, Colleen, this is Herschel. Can you go back to the Dun & Bradstreet scoring slide?
Yes.
There are a couple of questions about that.
Next one, Tom. Right there. Okay, so.
Yeah, so I think the assumption is that the score is like 0 to 100 or whatever, and that a score better than a 9 is higher than a 9, but a score lower than 9 is good. 9 is a bad score.
Yeah, they use a reverse ranking system where a 1 is the best score, the best financials that you could possibly have, and a 9 is the worst. So if you scored 1 through 8, you were able to get a contract. If you scored a 9, which indicates financial dissolvency, you received a failure for that financial review. And I see that we have some questions. Kyle,
Yes, so the first question that I'm seeing in the box says, will DIR provide individual detailed debriefs to companies not awarded a contract?
Yes, we will. You need to email me so I can provide you an individual debrief where we'll meet to talk about it, or I can provide you an email with your exact scores and comments for all categories.
And then the next question, and this, you already answered the first part, but it says, if yes to sending them, will the score include the evaluation of why the company was not eligible for an award?
If your company was deemed not to be eligible, you should have already been notified. So that's been taken care of, but if we have any scores for you, I will provide those exactly as the evaluation tool had them.
And then I believe you just answered this with Herschel, but if you want to follow up, it says, was it indicated in the RFP that the Dunn score had to be above a 9? How do we find out exactly why our proposal didn't meet requirements?
So again, if you failed the HSP, if you failed the administrative review, or if you failed financials, we emailed you out and let you know specifically the reason for your failure. Any other response was scored. You may not have been selected, but you were not disqualified from scoring.
Okay, and then I believe the answer to this is yes, but just asking, will this information is great for future understanding. Can this deck be shared?
Yes, we're going to share the deck. I believe we're going to share a recording of this as well, so you can listen to me fumble over my words. And I think, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, this will be a limited engagement. So I think it's going to be out there for 30 days for you to review that.
Right.
Okay. And then we just have a lot of questions again asking about how they can see their scores and finding out why they were not awarded. And then when will the RFO for DBITS for IT research and advisory, when is that coming out?
So that one is coming out next fiscal year. I do not have the exact date for when that will be posted, but it will be sometime in FY23, which starts August, September 1.
Yeah, so Colleen, I'm getting questions about that too separately. So folks, just watch the DIR page. You should see it there first. But certainly if you're on CMDL for that particular commodity code, you should get a notice when we post anything to ESPD.
Okay, let's see, what other questions do we have in here?
Yes, there will be another opportunity to propose, Kevin. Not like an open enrollment. This contract is 4 years. It's 2 base years with 2 one-year renewals. So in roughly 3 years, this is going to be rebid.
Kyle, I'll take Joanne's severance question. What was your rationale for giving a score of 8 for a vendor who was not on DBITS? And I think that we all recognize that agencies are supposed to report to DBITS, but they're not all really good about doing that. So we basically consider a no report a neutral report. And if anybody has any suggestions that they want to email in for how we should go about doing that, that's fine. But that was what we intended to do, and that's what we did as part of the evaluation process.
Yeah, and I can see you guys emailing me requesting that information. So I will email you all back with that information that is specific to your company. So these are rather long emails if you responded to all 4 companies. So please do read them thoroughly, because it'll tell you where that breakpoint was, what your actual overall place was in the rankings, and it'll give you comments about where you can improve or where you did extremely well in the evaluator comments. Kevin asked how many evaluators reviewed the proposal. We had a total of 6 evaluators, 3 on the marketing plan, and then 3 on Exhibit B and Exhibit B. There's a question about where did the analysis of the vendor ICT accessibility policy spreadsheet fall into the review and scoring. It was a pass-fail item. So basically, if you submitted any criteria to this, you either received a pass or we had clarifications for that vendor. The only way that you could fail it is if you did not submit documentation at all.
Colleen, it looks like there's a question. Why is it that the Hub Review Committee to correct any issues on the Hub plan that I submitted as a value-added reseller without a subcontractor plan?
And I'm not sure what that means, because we did not have value-added resellers on this contract. So we had only prime subcontract or prime contractors and any subcontractors that they were proposing.
And then is 5 years the minimum number of years to be in existence in regard to meeting requirements?
So no, it is not. There's no minimum years in existence. However, it was to explain that when you have a low number of years of existence and basically limited references compared to companies who have 30, 40 years of experience, it will shake out that you will score slightly lower than those other companies.
And then just a couple of questions on when will we post the companies that were awarded, and can we share the list of the vendors who were awarded?
So that is done. The ESBD is updated with a list of the companies that were awarded, as well as the DIR website.
There's a question on, did DIR validate the references in any way or no?
Yes, we did. Partially, the validation came in the form of the reference submitting to DIR directly, as opposed to receiving the references from the vendors, from you all. So that was the first level. If we received a reference that was from a Gmail address, for example, we might have emailed them back to get some more clarification. Plus, I also looked at each individual reference as they came in, and if I was unable to determine the vendor it was supposed to be for, or if I was unable to determine which category, I would email the reference directly.
And then let's see, what do we have on here? Can you share the number of vendors awarded by category?
Yes, and we have that on the slide. So if you want to go back a few slides, I think to slide 10, maybe, no, 11. So this is the number of awards that we made. We had a competitive break at 78, so 78 vendors potentially could have received an award, but it was how 77 vendors who were eligible when we factored in the hub and the financial review. Next slide. So 22 vendors received an award for technology category 2. Next slide. 70 vendors received an award for technology category 3. And finally, 35 vendors received an award for technology category 4.
Let's see. Do we need to request the analysis of our bid directly, or is there another place we can find this information?
There is not another place to find the information because of the competitive nature of the procurement. We don't make that available unless you ask me directly. So send me an email directly and I will provide that to you.
And then can you explain again how you scored the references? If you only had one reference, you received the same score if you had 3 references?
So yes, the evaluators were instructed to read the references, the quality of the references, and provide a score. They were not instructed to count the number of the references into the score. So I know what it's like. You have a hard time getting those references in. You cannot be accountable for your customers fulfilling the reference request. And because of that, if we received one, we knew that you had done business with the state and it was scored as if it was all 3 of those references.
So Colleen, let me sort
Yes,
of,
thank you.
I want to emphasize that because I think for some of the vendors that have been doing business with DIR for some time, certainly years ago, vendors were scored based on each of those references. Each reference would receive a score. But as Colleen noted, we don't want to penalize respondents because a customer of yours may not be comfortable or timely in submitting their reference to us directly. So it's similar to the Joanne question, I guess, about the VTPS scores. We're not going to penalize you because of the action or inaction of a customer, whether it's posting to ESPD, which is something they're required to do for certain contracts, or if it's a customer responding to your request for them to provide us a reference. So a big part of scoring the company's, the respondents' background, experience, et cetera, and the references. So the references are considered in that scoring. They're not independently scored for each one that is submitted or not submitted. Kyle, there are a couple of questions there with respect to the length of the contract, and is there an opportunity to propose like an open enrollment in the next year or 2? So, Colleen, is the contract 5 years? Did we cover that?
It's 2, initial base term of 2 years with 2 one-year renewals. So it's 4 years, I believe.
Okay, so 4 years. The open enrollment, that's not something that we routinely do. However, we don't ever rule it out. So we have had opportunities, not necessarily with DBITS, but with other RFOs, to go back and supplement or to augment that initial RFO. So we'll wait and see. We're not planning to do that, however.
Yep, Kyle, we got a few more questions.
Yes. So what happens if any vendor drops off this list or is not performing and may be removed over the next 4 years? Is this vendor replaced with another one?
So typically, no, we would not replace a vendor with the next highest scoring or whoever's on the list. If they do not perform or they get dropped for any reason, we will just have less contracts in that category.
And then we have a couple questions asking where on the DIR page they can access the list for the vendors awarded.
So I will try to get this right. So if you go to the DIR webpage and you click on I am a vendor, and I'm going to do it right now while you're doing it. You click on I'm a vendor, and then you go to, oh, no, don't click on that. Don't click on that. Forget that. If you go to IT Solutions, go to DBITS, and it'll have all of the categories that are out there. So we split up the categories because we were still operating under the old DBITS categories where we had 9 independent categories as opposed to 4 combined. If you look under those categories, you'll have the categories of vendors who received an award, but you can also search for DBITS and it'll give you all of the vendors who received an award. So if you use the search function and type in DBITS, all of those vendors will show up.
I put the link in the chat. I know we said not to use the chat, but
Herschel, can you repost that? It looks like it only went to hosts and panelists. If you send it to everyone.
thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Then,
There you go. Thank you.
Yep. Kyle.
Let's see. We also have a question asking, were vendor sales report data considered in the evaluation?
If only if it was a question. So I think that would have been on, if it was on anything, it would be on Exhibit B.
And then this might be a more specific question that you might want to answer later, but it just asks, we answered all exhibit with project details as well as references and existing DIR ITSAC vendor. We still did not get awarded.
Yeah, it was a high number of eligible responses. You probably, and this is just based on the question, you probably scored very well. However, it was such a competitive field that the competitive break cut off before you your vendor was eligible for award.
And that
So
was that's it for
it.
the questions that we have in there right now.
Okay, and I know I saw a question that was about how do we get work orders? To get work under DBITS, it's a statement of work process that is sent out to every vendor dependent on the agency. So if a vendor is looking for program or project management services, they can send it to 3 vendors if it's between $50,000 and $1 million, or they have to send it to 6 vendors if it's $1 million to $10 million, or they can send it to any number in between. You will get work under those contracts if you respond to a statement of work, but I cannot guarantee that your company will be selected to receive a statement of work.
Colleen, we have a question saying on the program and project management list, it shows 52 vendors, but your slide is showing 35.
If you are talking about what's on the website versus what's on the slide, my slide is correct. I am not sure what the website is pulling. All right,
Okay.
If that's
Colleen,
all,
I do see a couple of questions in the chat. Where in the link show the awardees? Once you're on that DBITS page, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the categories listed on that DBITS page on the DIR site. And then there's a little drop down arrow over to the right. And if you click that little drop down arrow next to each category, you will see the link that will take you to the group of vendors who were awarded under that category. Okay, and then another question, if a vendor has multiple SOWs with different customers, does the vendor submit a PAR to each customer or a single PAR to DIR?
that is a hub question, I think. Tom, Kyle, Brianna.
I'm not
I
sure
will
the
look
answer
into
to
that and I will get back to you.
I can answer that question.
Oh, Laura, thank you, Laura.
Of course. If a vendor has multiple SOWs, as in they are doing business with multiple contracting agencies, they must submit a PAR to each of the contracting agencies and a copy of each of those PARs to the DIR. Therefore, if, for example, you're doing business with HHSC and DFPS and TCEQ, you would have 3 different PARs. All 3 of those would also come to the DIR. If that did not make sense, please write back into the chat or into the QA so we can further clarify.
So also a question about competitive break. Where did I see that? Oh, yeah.
In the questions.
Yeah, I can try to answer that, Colleen. So in terms of the competitive break, and this is guidance that we received from the state, from statewide procurement division, and then the state contract procurement and contract. The break basically is when you score each response independently, you pull all those scores together, you sort them by order, and where you see that there's a break in the scoring. So I'm making up numbers here. Let's say you have vendors that score 99 to 80, and you've got a group of 50 vendors that scored 99 to 80 in terms of their total score. And then you have a gap, and nobody scored 79, 78, 77, and the next vendor scores 66. That is a natural break in the scores that we look for when we're determining the competitive break. And so we looked for competitive breaks in each of the categories.
Okay, and it looks like the discrepancy on the website maybe because we are pulling some telecom contracts under the project management category. So the competitive break for project management was at 35. That is what the list should be showing on the website, and we do have some vendors that are showing up that have telecom contracts. All right.
I see a couple of more. I see a couple of more questions.
Are you sure?
Let's see. Oh, I just saw one disappear. Sorry.
I just took that one, Tom. That was just basically a thank you.
Okay.
So you can get an accurate list on the Electronic State Business Daily or the ESBD. That will have a complete listing and the vendor's address. It does not have the web address, but it does have the address posted on the ESBD under 553.
Colleen, we have a question saying, you're not saying that we did not qualify. You're saying that there were too many companies that scored higher than us, so we fell off. Is that correct?
That's probably correct. I don't know your individual company, but if you met all of the criteria and you were scored and you still did not receive a contract, it is because you fell below that number, whatever the arbitrary break was for that category.
And it's hard to, answer these questions, of the vendors who know what they turned in, but we here are not looking at those scores or where they rank. So it'll help, I believe, if you get the scores to see where you landed, and then you may have further questions about it.
Colleen, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A.
No, nor do I. So thank you all very much today.
I do see one in the chat. Please let us know. We can request RTI for reviewing and referring response proposal of the awarded vendors for future reference along with the evaluation.
I'm not sure what that means. Can you restate the question?
Or you can also email Colleen with that question as well.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the RTI is. Is that an acronym for something that I just can't get to right now?
Oh, you're wanting to do a public information request.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I was going to go with the second part of it. It looks like they're asking for the winning proposals.
Okay.
So you can put a request in. There is a link on our website to put in a request. You can do that now. This solicitation has officially closed. I will put the break or the link in there for the public information request.
Yeah, so they did clarify. Thank you. Please let us know if we can get awarded vendors proposal for reference along with the evaluation.
And this is the link. Everyone, for the public information request. It's at the very bottom of our website in case you're ever looking for it. All right, now I'm going to say thank you for coming. This was a lot of fun, and I have a lot of emails to answer, so I'm going to get started on that. Thank you, guys.
And we will provide you with a copy of the presentation today. So thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon.